Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video where today we return with episode 107, if I'm not mistaken, of Knowing Wheel. Now, this podcast, on occasion, has been, I think the correct term is a little bit janky from time to time. This, by far and away, though, steals the cherry on top of the cake for weird podcast setups that we've ever done on the show. Now, Jamie, talk me through your situation right now before we go into the show and explain why things are going to be weird.
Yeah, well, hello everyone. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening. But I'm away from home, as you can probably tell. I'm in a place in North Wales, so naturally the internet isn't very good. Means that my phone won't connect efficiently to 4G, so I can't hotspot my laptop because I'm in a place with no Wi-Fi in my room, which is great. Yeah, so I can't hotspot my laptop, which means I'm currently on the phone to Matt on my phone, and then recording my audio and camera on a laptop that's currently not connected to the internet, holding my microphone in my hand, and my laptop is propped up on a book. So things could be better, to say the least. But we're here. We've made it for a Tuesday, hopefully, depending on what time.
It's going to be Wednesday. The show's going out Wednesday.
Well, there we go. Yeah, so ready to record a podcast in probably the weirdest way that we've ever done.
This is like a podcast from 1998, I reckon, and just for context on my end, I've got Jamie in one of my ears. It does sound to me like he's talking to me from the bottom of a well, so this is only going to go well. But pun intended as well, by the way. Let's get into it, though. Australian Grand Prix, Jamie. We had a couple of interesting talking points, didn't we? Before the weekend, of course, Formula 1 heads to the land down under. We've had the first two races out in the Middle East, and already fingers are starting to get pointed. George Russell, the big one this week, saying Red Bull are over a second faster than any other car on the grid.
Yeah, and I think that's probably pushing it a little bit, but it's true that in the first three races, Red Bull have, spoilers, have won all of them at a canter, to be honest. So, yeah, I do feel like they are holding something back, but then, of course, they would, because if you can win with 50% of pushing, then why wouldn't you do that? There's no point, like, going 100% and potentially crashing or whatever. But
Ayrton Senna versus Alain Prost, isn't it, really?
Yeah, completely. But I do think 1 second clear is probably exaggeration, but they're definitely comfortably the fastest car on the grid. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me still. Like we said, there's been all these talks about our Red Bull holding back some potential performance and all this, that, and the other. But it wouldn't surprise me if they were around about a second clear at the front of the field, at least in race trim, anyway. Now, I think the other sort of interesting, and I don't think this was on any of our bingo cards this week, was it, Jamie? Was the comments made by Bernd Mailander towards the end of last week. Talking about, for the first time ever, as far as we know, at least publicly anyway, about Abu Dhabi 2021. That was quite an interesting read.
I actually didn't read that. I didn't see it. But was it about he basically was just confused? Was that the gist of it?
So basically what he said was along the lines of, and I'm trying to paraphrase here, was obviously after that Grand Prix, he basically said he got back out of the safety car, of course, but he came back in before the end of the race. Obviously, they had their last lap. Obviously, he's still on standby then in case something happens. Of course, we know obviously what did happen, but obviously it didn't then warrant another safety car. And all he said then after that was he was in such disbelief as to what he'd just seen that he walked into the paddock with his helmet still on, which he said he never really tends to do, walked straight through the paddock to the other end, and just had to sit out by the water by himself to try and make sense of what on earth he'd just witnessed. He said he'd never seen anything like it. He never felt so confused in Formula 1.
Yeah, and you kind of understand why. It was completely unprecedented at the time. And I mean, I'm sure Abu Dhabi 21 will come up again later in this podcast, but yeah, it was a confusing time for a lot of people, especially those who know their rules very well, such as Bernd Mailander, obviously does it for a living, so he knows all of the official rules for what a safety car procedure is, and knows that they were changed last minute to kind of end a championship, which is difficult to swallow. I guess I don't know if he had a favourite at the time, but if it was Hamilton, it probably would be very difficult to swallow.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, again, we talk about Burt Mylander. In my opinion, still to this day, probably one of the most unsung heroes in Formula One. He's been doing this job since I think it's either 2000 or 1999. I'm pretty certain he's like in the top 5 of most laps led in a Grand Prix, if you included him with the drivers of all time as well, which is absolutely mental. But definitely knows his stuff. Well, I thought, it was very, very interesting, of course, reading through. And he's definitely up there as well, for me anyway, of someone that when he retires, I'd love to read a book from him. I think he'd make a fantastic book from a very odd and unique perspective of the world of Formula One.
If you're watching Burnt, we'll have you on the podcast anytime.
Burnt, honestly, if you're watching this show, we would absolutely love to have you on the podcast at some point.
I'm sure
but anyway,
watching.
Yeah, I'm sure he is. Let's jump in then, Jamie, to free practice. And immediately, things got a little bit weird, didn't they? Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate just for 1 second here as we talk about all of Sergio Perez's struggles. Now, I don't know if you saw this as well, actually, going back to Saudi Arabia. He put a tweet out after the weekend saying, fantastic to get my 5th win in Formula One, really, really difficult, but happy with the result. I want to be champion. That tweet then got taken out, deleted even, I should say, and replaced with exactly the same one without that last sentence. Let's play devil's advocate then. Suddenly, Sergio Perez, struggling with the brakes on the car. Red Bull definitely didn't sabotage him, for those of you that believe it. But it was weird to see, wasn't it? Because he's such an experienced driver. You don't really expect someone with, 12 years experience in Formula One to struggle that much with something like that.
Yeah. But then I don't think they were sabotaging, obviously, because that would be ridiculous. No. But, I think it was just a bit of an off weekend for him, really. It was kind of like his FP3 session was an absolute nightmare, wasn't it? Especially.
Yes,
and that FP2 really did spill over into qualifying, because I feel like he hadn't really got his head in the game, because obviously it was his first flying lap in Q1 that he messed up and went off. So it was a very strange weekend for Perez, especially after he's a point off the championship lead. That's probably the closest he's ever been, apart from before a season starts. And you kind of think it's now time to seize the opportunity, really, really put some pressure on the team and on Verstappen if he can. So to go and kind of drop an absolute howler of a weekend, then it's not really the best look, and I guess he'll pick himself up, but it's definitely not the best way that he would have wanted to carry on from Saudi.
No, exactly, and it is a weird one, because let's be fair, sensibly, neither of us believe Sergio Perez has got a world championship in him, at least against Max Verstappen.
No,
but I think pretty much everyone would have also said that about Rosberg come the end of 2015, probably everyone except for yourself. So stranger things have happened in the world of Formula One, I'm sure. But if Sergio wanted to apply pressure to the team, wanted to try and sort of get under Max's feathers, it was not really the way to do it, was it? Especially, like we said, when we got into qualifying. Because, of course, as you mentioned, first run, immediately goes and bins it down at turn 3, beaches himself in the gravel, and that's it, over.
Yeah, and basically any chance of winning the race is gone, because you've got to see Verstappen. Yeah, Verstappen's going to probably get pole now, and therefore by the time you're even second, if you get to second, he'll be 15-20 seconds down the road. So yeah, it was a very almost like a rookie error from a man with a lot of experience in the sport. So kind of expect better from someone like that, and obviously he'll pick himself up and go again in Baku. Is it Baku next? I think it's Baku.
It's Baku in 4 weeks' time. We've got plenty of mini off-season to talk about. But of course, qualifying wasn't overly dramatic. Obviously, Zhou Guanyu, Oscar Piastri, Bottas and Sargent joined Perez out in Q1. Must be noted as well, wasn't it? Throughout Saudi as well. What has happened to Alfa Romeo?
Yeah, because Bottas was, 8th or 9th in... No, it was 8th place in Bahrain, wasn't he? But then they've always been good at Bahrain. He was 8th
in Bahrain, yeah.
And then ever since, they've just dropped. They were supposedly in that pack fighting, I guess, for 5th or 6th fastest car. And then immediately, I guess hopefully for Joe's sake, as a fan of his, it's just track based and the high speed stuff doesn't really suit them. But yeah, the last 2 races they've been at best like 9th fastest, which is pretty shocking from a team that finished 6th last year, and we're hoping to kind of build on that. But as a Joe fan, I've got to also say that he did outperform Bottas all weekend, as he did in Jeddah as well. So yeah, shout out to him. 2-1 in the qualifying head-to-head. So we take that. We take the small wins.
Yeah, no, Joe certainly does seem, well suited to the Alfa Romeo car at the moment, but yeah, just very, very weird. It makes you wonder whether perhaps Bottas is struggling with the car that then obviously means because he's so experienced in comparison to Zhou Guanyu, whether he just can't give them the feedback they need that helps set up the car that then both of them can get more out of it. But yeah, I mean, Alfa Romeo are the only team with both cars out in Q1. Obviously, we just mentioned that list of drivers. Q2 as well, though. Esteban Ocon, Yuki Tsunoda, Norris, Kevin Magnussen, and Nick de Vries out in that session. And Alex Albon makes it into Q3. Williams, once again, I'll look him. Don't get me wrong, not top of the midfield or anything like that, but when Albon gets it hooked up on a qualifying run, they've got a decent little package.
They certainly have, and James Vowles did good stuff for that team. I think he's kind of keeping them very level-headed. He's a very thoughtful guy for any interviews you've heard of him, with him. And yeah, Albon's just doing a really good job. Unfortunate about what happened on the Sunday, but yeah, also a little shout out to the AlphaTauri cars, because they were looking slightly better this weekend, certainly, because Bahrain and Jeddah were not great for those two, but to get both cars in Q2, Tsunoda in 12th, sorry, on the grid, that's not that bad for them. And also Hulk P5 in Q2. Didn't think I was going to get through that without saying that.
No, I did wonder when that one was going to come in. But I mean, of course, yes, sensibly we all knew it was going to be Max Verstappen on pole. I think the real question was going to be A, by how much, and B, who would be joining him on the front row there. And it was quite a spicy little battle. Fernando Alonso, George and Lewis all kind of trading that second place time, obviously, over the course of the session. It's kind of weird now because, of course, we've got Red Bull at the front. We've got Merckx and Fernando battling behind them. And then we've kind of got Stroll and the Ferraris that just seem to be a little bit further away. I mean, we've always said Stroll is not a qualifier. But yeah, Ferrari just had an absolute disaster in Q3, didn't they? Completely tripped over each other because they were worried it was going to rain, so didn't allow either driver to do proper tyre warm-up.
Yeah, and it's just the perennial gift that keeps on giving of Ferrari. So yeah, I wonder when they're going to sort it out, but they're looking like probably 4th fastest car at the minute, although back in Bahrain they were probably, 3rd, maybe close to second?
Second,
So,
definitely.
yeah.
And I mean, even on race pace, they were still second this weekend.
Yeah, it's just stuff just seems to go wrong for them. Maybe it's you got to look at the team at that point, which we have done for the last 5, 10, 15 years. So.
Yeah, pretty much. But I mean, shout out as well, like we said, of course, Jamie gave Hulk a shout out for P5 in Q2. Where was that time in Q3? He ended up last behind Alex Albon up in P8 there, as best of the rest is kind of incredible. And then obviously Gasly just between them. And then, of course, Jamie, we get to Sunday. Sunday fun day. And the action pretty much kicks off immediately, doesn't it?
Yeah, straight away, lap 1, you have Verstappen on pole from the two Mercedes, sorry, not 2 Red Bulls. And lights go out, and straight away, it's not a great start from him as a 2-time champion. And Russell, straight into turn 1, takes the lead of the race. And then that kind of pushes Verstappen offline a little bit, obviously well within his right to. And then down towards turn 3, Verstappen seems to be clear of Hamilton and Alonso, who were just behind him, but then breaks very strangely about 50 metres early, well, at least maybe 30 metres early for turn 3. And Hamilton and Alonso both launch attacks on either side of him. And Hamilton, at least, down the inside, does get into second place as well. So it's a 1-2 for Mercedes. And this is kind of, I want to talk about this a little bit, because it's very sad to me that Verstappen is being so careful. That's because all through his career, he's been this young gun, like, I don't know, like screw the establishment kind of thing. Like, I'm going for it, whatever happens, I'm going to be there pushing. And now he's got the fastest car, like, quite comfortably. He knows that he just doesn't need to take any risks, and it kind of is a bit sad to see. But then it gets him race wins and world championships. But as a fan of his, it is disappointing in a way. But like, I guess it's just part of the game, really, isn't it?
I mean, only you, Jamie, could moan that Verstappen's now being more sensible. But no, I do kind of get what you mean about that, because I mean, I think it's very, very interesting, because let's be completely honest here. With Perez out of the picture, it was going to take something disastrous for Max not to win this race, even if the first lap was a bit of a nightmare. Of course, the smart money for him now, you see those Mercs steamrolling down your inside at 1 and 3, you let them go. But doesn't work out so well when you spend all these years banging on about how, you know, you're a proper racer and you're always going to fight for every position till the bitter end. Because as soon as, of course, you're the one with the upper hand, you're not going to do that anymore because it's not sensible. Perhaps you should have just been a bit more careful with your wording in the first place.
Yeah, potentially. And I guess it's kind of what we saw with Hamilton. You know, when he came into the sport, he was going up against the grain, like trying to be the guy who's taking it to the big guns. And then as soon as he got the dominant car, as he did. As soon as he got the dominant car, he then does the same thing and starts driving sensibly with his head, which, it's perfectly valid and it makes a lot of sense, but it's not as exciting as a fan of them, because you kind of want to see them be who they are and be the guy who they always have been.
I think it's part of maturing inside Formula One, I think. But yeah, I mean, taking risk, of course, is always a risky thing. It's probably the best thing I can say about that. Especially if you take that risk and go for an apex when there's 2 Aston Martins on your inside. What do we say about Charles Leclerc there? What a rookie error.
Yeah, such a weird mistake on lap 1 of a race. Especially I mean, it's obviously he's not right at the front or anything, so he's not really lost like a potential race win, for instance, but it's just a really bad misjudgment from a guy who's been around for ages. And I think what kind of painted the picture was just his disappointment on the radio. He couldn't even blame Stroll, really. He didn't really try to, because he knew immediately I just turned across him. It's just, you don't do that on lap 1 of a race. You just need to be a bit aware. Not Leclerc's finest hour, but he's not had a great start to the season, in all honesty. Obviously, second DNF out of 3 races, and the way he did finish, it was down in 7th place. So needs to pick himself up a bit.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you've seen this stat as well. If Leclerc fails to score points in Baku, which so far there's a 66% chance of, looking at previous races, it will be his worst start to a Formula 1 season ever, and that includes his year at Sauber.
Yeah, since Sauber, he did finish actually 6th in Baku, didn't he? Which was
He did, got 8 points. So if he finishes 10th or below in Baku, it's his worst ever start to a Formula 1 season. I mean,
and that includes 2020 Ferrari as well in there.
Exactly. The dog Ferrari. I mean, it's a weird situation, because I think, we've both always said Charles Leclerc is, it's probably in 5-10 years from now we'll talk about the big 4 being George, Max, Charles, Lando. I think is a pretty sensible bet. I don't think at the moment, I'm not sure there's anyone else, unless of course we look towards the junior ranks, that is really going to sort of get with those 4 at the moment. But Lando's still stuck down at McLaren. He's got to get himself out of there. Max obviously is sitting pretty 2 world championships already. He's got Red Bull wrapped around his little finger. He basically can do what he wants with them at the moment. George Russell, he's just got to wait for Mercedes to try and get back there. I don't think he's going anywhere else anytime soon. But it really does feel like Charles Leclerc. We're kind of seeing this timeline already, aren't we, now, of what we saw with Seb, what we saw with Fernando, and so many others in the past. He is well and truly getting Ferrari'd, isn't he?
Yeah, it seems like the excitement, like the joy of being in Formula 1 just kind of gets drained out of you when you're at Ferrari for so long as a driver. So, and it is partly down to, obviously, the team letting him down in the past with machinery and with reliability, but eventually it becomes a bit of both when you're just not performing to your level because your head's not in a good place. And I think, that is exactly what we saw with Alonso and with Vettel. It's just the negative feedback loop of being at Ferrari for so long, which is really catching up with Leclerc. So I genuinely would see him at Aston Martin once Alonso retires in 2035 or whatever.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as well. I mean, again, I know we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but can't we just get Stroll out of Aston Martin and have 2 good drivers there? But
unlikely.
could it be Charles? Could it be Lando Norris? Could we see someone else sort of sniffing up that tree over the next couple of years? Only time will tell. But of course, yeah, Max Verstappen then dropped back down behind both Mercs early on, and there was a tiny part of me that was there like, Mercedes are back, and then obviously you see him absolutely fly past the other cars, and of course, there was a decent little fight going on early on, but it was a case of when rather than if, like I said, that Max was going to win that race until he got turned on its head on just lap 9.
Yeah, and Alex Albon, who we spoke about having a really good weekend up to this point, unfortunately for him, made a bit of an error. Well, it was a very large error. Didn't seem to be any mechanical reason for it, but just ran wide at turn 5, the fast right-hander. Did its wheel to the grass there, and then the next corner, turn 6, he completely just lost the back end, which looked very strange, but I guess it was just a dirty tyre thing. No one has said that there was an issue, so I think it's got to go down as a driver error, unfortunately. But dropped it into the gravel, hit the front wing on the tyre wall, quite a high-speed crash. Hulkenberg very nearly sideswiped him, which would have been horrific if they actually did make contact. So it was a cloud of gravel on the track. But thankfully no one crashed into the side of the Williams that was strewn across the track. And that brought out the safety car fairly immediately, which was attempted to be taken advantage of by a few drivers, including the race leader at that point, George Russell. Which, was quite a bold strategy call, but I guess we've seen it in the past a lot. When you've got two drivers at the front, you can kind of split your strategies, and George went for it. And,
certainly interesting, wasn't it? It definitely did very, very quickly. I think, just mentioning the Albon crash, though, I think that crash was kind of a very, very good explainer. So, say, for example, you got someone that isn't particularly in the know of Formula 1, and obviously they see Albon qualify 8th and go, oh, well, it must be the 5th fastest car then. It's those moments where the Williams still really lacks in comparison to everything else, and that is just the window that it operates in. Over one lap, that Williams can be a fast car, but it is so sensitive still. It's things like gusts of winds that Williams still talk about that car struggles with. A gust of wind is going to happen in a Formula 1 race. You've got to build a car that can get around that. So, I mean, Albon definitely, he was the one behind the wheel at the time. He was at fault. But the fact that Williams' car is so sensitive still, I do honestly believe if any other car had gone through at that speed, at that angle, they would have been absolutely fine.
Yeah. And the operating window is tiny on that Williams. So a little bit of dirt on the tyres, maybe a wind, maybe, just the tyres were slightly lower temperature than they were the previous lap or something like that. It just causes it to go, which is a shame.
Yeah. So, of course, obviously, like you said, George Russell, a handful of others pit. And then, pretty much as soon as they come back out, the FIA then go, oh, we're having a red flag instead. Which I've noticed on the notes, Jamie, you've actually put was not needed. It looked on the face of it like, it could have just been a safety car. What actually happened was the tech bro had been ripped apart from the way it's bonded together. So that's why they had to bring out a red flag, because obviously it was going to take 15-20 minutes to get it sorted. An annoying red flag, I'm sure, for George Russell and many of the people watching at home. But in all fairness, once we sort of found out that information did make sense. Of course, we get green flag racing once again not long after that. And I mean, this time around, Max Verstappen just kind of rockets past Lewis Hamilton. I think it was something ridiculous, like when he overtook Lewis, he had, I think it was a 25km/h advantage. And by the end of the straight, because Hamilton had ran out of battery, Max, before they both broke, was going 36km/h faster, which is the difference probably close between a Formula 2 and a Formula 3 car. It was mental.
Yeah, well, if you're stood in a town, just stood still, walking on the pavement, and a car goes past you at 30 miles an hour, that's basically the difference in speed.
Yeah, mental. Absolutely mental.
Which is crazy.
And I mean, obviously, we then saw Lewis lose close to 2 seconds, wasn't it, in the sector after that?
Yeah.
A lot of people were going, well, that's Red Bull's clear pace. 2 seconds a sector is 6 seconds a lap, which definitely isn't quite right. But Hamilton had made a bit of an error there, and obviously, like we said, used too much battery as well. But that Red Bull is just unbelievable down the straights, isn't it, at the moment? I mean, again, the first 3, I mean, Baku as well should play into that. I mean, every track's going to play into their hands sensibly. But obviously Baku as well should be ridiculous for them. But it has been a case of Red Bull have had some of their best tracks come up first as well, or at least that's what I tell myself to sleep at night.
Yeah, maybe when we get to like the 3 tracks a year that are high downforce, then Red Bull might come up with nothing. But we'll have to wait and see.
I'm not going to hold my breath, I don't think. But of course, yeah, a lot of the race then after that, to be honest, there wasn't a huge amount going on. Of course, with the 4 DRS zones, it did kind of mean that overtaking was quite easy. Now, one thing I did want to ask you, Jamie, talking about it, was, of course, DRS zone 3 and 4 just had the one detection point between them. Do we think there should have been another detection point placed either in the fast 9 and 10 chicane or just after it? Or not at all?
Yeah, potentially. Because I did think the few times that there were overtakes into turn 11, it was... Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The few times, sorry, that there were overtakes into turn 9, the car that overtook then got it again to pull away. Sort of like Verstappen and Hamilton did earlier in the race. So, yeah, I'm always a fan of the 2 back-to-back with different detection points, as long as it doesn't become stupid like at Jeddah last year with Leclerc and Verstappen. But I think if you put a detection point at the inside of that chicane, like the middle part, then that shouldn't have screwed everything that badly, I don't think. And maybe would have made for a few more longer battles, because often we saw it would be a DRS train, the faster car. I don't know, for instance, Perez came through the midfield quite quickly, or it wasn't super quickly, but lap after lap he would just pick one off, and it was like 6 in a train, and he would pick them off into turn 9 and then pull away into turn 11. So it would be nice to see some slightly more longer battles, especially between cars of similar pace.
Yeah, no, I think that is fair enough. And like I said, I don't think that sensibly, if you've just been overtaken in towards 9 and 10, that it's very likely you'd get another easy run past the car that's just jumped you. That's why I sort of think it could have potentially been a good idea.
To keep
but, I think...
the next lap, potentially.
Yeah, exactly. It allows you to just stay that little bit closer, of course. But, I mean, the other big thing that was kind of quite surprising, wasn't it? Throughout sort of the midway stage of the Grand Prix was just the fact you had, Pierre Gasly even, and Nico Hülkenberg that were just kind of matching the top drivers still. Obviously, Verstappen had pulled away, but they were still keeping up with Stroll and Sainz, which are never the greatest benchmarks in the world, but they were putting up a fight against those quicker cars.
Yeah, and it was really nice to see, actually, because you kind of had Verstappen gone, you had Hamilton and Alonso kind of sparring for P2 with, like, I don't know, 1.5 seconds it usually was.
Yeah,
really
sparring is quite a clickbaity term to describe their battle.
Yeah, definitely. But Sky were hyping it up, so I'm going to do the same. Then you had, Sainz P4, then it was Gasly P5, actually, wasn't it, ahead of Stroll and Hülkenberg. And actually, that little pack of 4, which is 4 completely different cars, 3 different engine suppliers in there. Like, you had these 2 cars which we've kind of written off as midfield at best, like the Alpine and the Haas. Actually, they were completely holding their own, it was nice to see. I always just like races where it's kind of normal that there isn't a massive field spread, and teams without the fastest car can kind of just stay with the faster cars, which is exactly what we saw. And shout out to those 2 drivers as well. I think they did really well.
I can't think why you'd shout out those 2 in particular, but fair enough.
One of them until the very end.
it does show as well, doesn't it, that A, the new aerodynamic regs are working a bit more, cars can stay close to each other, and B, of course, whether for better or for worse, it shows that having the 4 DRS zones around Albert Park really was helping some of those cars as well, of course, that were able to stay in the DRS of a faster car in front of them. Of course, as the race carried on, though, Lando Norris was putting in some banging lap times as well. Of course, he had Perez that was trying to close in on him, and they were both closing up to that group, as you mentioned, at quite a rapid rate of knots, until Hülkenberg and Norris's little battle.
Yeah, which eventually Hülkenberg did lose a DRS off the back of Stroll, and then, obviously, without that big tow rope, effectively, he started to fall back towards Norris. I think over this weekend the McLaren probably was a touch faster than the Haas, although that's what I'll tell myself.
Better driver.
And then there was 1 lap out of turn 11, Hülkenberg ahead. He he was very, very clever. It kind of manipulated the track to his advantage in terms of weaving and blocking. But so he went to the right so he kind of took the racing line through the little kink of turn. Well, it's not really a turn, is it?
It's not a turn at all, yeah, but I know what you mean.
Kind of followed the line back towards the left, and then last minute defended the inside. So it was effectively, if it was a straight bit of track, it would have been 2 moves. But because of that little turn, he used that to his advantage to very cleverly block Norris without breaking the rules, which was a little bit naughty, but he got away with it. So I'm all for it. And then, sadly though, a lap later, he couldn't repeat the feat. It was actually quite a good move from Norris to go to the outside of turn 11 and then switch back onto the inside of turn 12, and Hulkenberg rather foolishly thought he could swing a car around the outside of turn 12 and ended up having a little trip across the gravel. But then there was such a big gap behind, which I guess he knew, that he didn't really lose anything in terms of race position, at least.
Yeah, no, it was certainly nice to see that the fighting spirit was still there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then, of course, from there, things, after what had been, not the most eventful Grand Prix in the world, but a decent little race, it just all falls apart, doesn't it, late on in the day. Kevin Magnussen, very, very weird error, slaps the wall coming out of turn 2, loses a rear wheel, and all madness ensues, doesn't it? First of all, we get a safety car. We've got 5 laps to go. The FIA are panicking. They're not going to get this sorted beforehand, so they just throw out another red flag.
Yeah, and this one really was pointless. So I think it's kind of like an unwritten rule, like a gentleman's agreement, that they're going to try and not have races finish under the safety car because of what happened in Abu Dhabi, I guess, and just for excitement purposes, which just doesn't make any sense to me. If there's a crash with a lap to go, just call it. Nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was odd, the call to make a red flag there, and it kind of voided all the work of the likes of Verstappen, Gasly, who've been really just pumping in 56 laps, or would have been 54 laps, I guess,
yeah,
of trying to make these gaps, stay with the runners you should be staying with, and then just to red flag it and call it a 2-lap sprint, it just seems like that's not what the sport's about, really. So yeah, it was a shame for the spectacle of the race, but also it benefited the spectacle of the race, I guess, because it was a bit chaotic and a bit mad that we're going to have this 2-lap sprint. But yeah, it's not what I like. The F1 purist in me was crying a little bit at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this was the thing, wasn't it? Because let's be fair, obviously K-Mag crashed, they brought out the safety car, obviously the field was frozen, they brought out a red flag, and obviously everyone then is going, right, or everyone inside the FIA is going, this is great, fans are going to love it, we're going to have 2 laps of brilliant battling to get to the end of the race. What they forgot was that despite having some of the best drivers in the world, sometimes these drivers still have an absolute nightmare. So I think they had this vision of a 2-lap scrap, Hamilton, Verstappen, Alonso, our 3 world champions going at it. And of course it just all goes Pete Tong at turn 1, doesn't it?
Yeah. So we work out the restart, and straight away there's probably I haven't counted properly, but at least 4 or 5 drivers make totally unforced errors into turn 1 or turn 3, which is, when you've only got 16 runners at that point. That's basically a quarter of the grid have just made completely uncharacteristic errors. Maybe not fully uncharacteristic for the likes of Sargent or Stroll, but yeah, errors that really the pinnacle drivers in the world should not be making. And part of it is down to dangling the carrot in front of them of right, 2 laps, you've got to do it all at turn 1 or turn 3.
Well, it is all or nothing, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and then part of it also, I guess, is the lap round to the grid. Technically not a formation lap because it counts in the race. So I know Verstappen was saying afterwards that everyone's tyres were just super cool because the lap to the grid was ridiculously slow because of the safety car, rather than doing a normal formation lap. But yeah, I don't make excuses for them because some of those mistakes in there were shocking.
I mean, let's be fair. We had Sainz, obviously, was the big one, locked up and hit his fellow Spaniard, Fernando Alonso. That put Alonso into the wall, somehow was able to carry on. Ocon was trying to Gasly was trying to avoid all that, and then him and Ocon come together in what only could ever happen down at Alpine. So after running a brilliant race, both of them trashed their cars with 2 laps to go. Perez locked up and ran off at turn 1. Sargent locked up at turn 1 and completely murdered Nick de Vries. Somehow hasn't got a penalty for it, even to now, which I'm not quite sure how he's got away with.
Yeah.
And then my personal favourite the entire lot was, of course, Lance Stroll then at turn 3, just panicked and locked up and threw himself off the road as well. He was on the podium and he threw it away.
Yeah, completely. And just coming out of turn 4 and 5, I guess, they throw out another red flag, which, well, I'm going to rant about this. Is now the time? Shall I just go for it?
Go for it.
All right, here we go. Because we obviously saw in Silverstone 2022, you throw a red flag on effectively what is a lap 1 before Sector 1 split. You haven't had everyone through Sector 1, so you don't have an official timing, I guess, to measure the grid positions for the restart. What I don't get quite this time round is everyone had gone through Sector 1, apart from Fernando Alonso, who's in a wall, and the 2 Alpines, who are in a wall, and De Vries and Sargent, who are in a gravel trap. So, effectively, the reason they haven't been able to measure the differences is because Alonso spun out. But obviously, Alonso's last because the rest of them are out of the race. So they do have an official timing. They just chose not to use it. The reason I'm so passionate about this is because Nico Hülkenberg had an absolute storm of a restart and was running P4 after starting 9th on the grid. And Sainz has a penalty on the way because he took out Alonso. So had they actually measured the grid as it should have been for the 4th start, Hulkenberg genuinely, not even baiting, would have had a podium finish. And Tsunoda as well would have been 4th in a terrible AlphaTauri. So it really did screw over a few drivers who were on for some really good stuff. But what they actually did instead was be super trigger happy with the red flag. I think they basically went into this restart like, right, if anyone crashes, we're just pressing the red flag button straight away. So as soon as the Alpines crashed, they were like, right, red flag immediately. Where if they just even threw a safety car for 2/3 of a lap and then red flag it, they then get the order, and it doesn't make the whole restart pointless. But I guess they were a little bit scared of Alonso probably, or whoever was going to crash out, because it would have been really painful for the Aston Martin teams. I guess it was painful for the Alpines because they couldn't take the 4th start. But it really, if they'd have been 10 seconds more patient, which is so painful, Hulkenberg would have restarted P4 and then took the P3 when Sainz got his penalty. So probably the closest call has ever been to a Hulkenberg podium, which is very frustrating. But
which is saying something, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it just got to the point, didn't it, where obviously then, like we said, obviously the red flag was then brought out again. Now, of course, as Jamie mentioned, when they do an outlap, that counts as a lap in the Grand Prix. So they weren't going to get another lap's worth of racing in anyway unless they start counting backwards, which they then kind of half did with the result, except for the cars that had crashed out. So they now weren't part of the race anymore, of course, because they're crashed out. But everyone else has got to go back into the order they were before all those cars crashed out. It just became farcical incredibly quickly. And I mean, it didn't even affect particularly any of the drivers I'm really worried or invested about either. Obviously, I can see why you're so upset, because obviously it screwed a driver you're a fan of, and that's fair enough. But it just got ridiculous, because of course, Sainz then gets Sainz gets a penalty even for an incident that has now not happened on a lap that counts in the race. I personally still felt that was a penalty. I'm sure you do as well. He was the one that meant then that lap didn't count, so of course he should still get penalised. But then, of course, we spend half an hour back in the pit lane with them just moving cars up and down the pitch so they're in the right order, just to go out and do one more lap behind safety car where no one can overtake anyway. It's just, you sat there watching it going, I just want to switch off the TV at this point.
I did switch it off at that point. I had stuff to do, so I was like, right, I know what's happening here. Hulk's not getting a podium anymore. I'm off. So, it was like, technically the lap 56 did happen in the order, because that's kind of why they were on lap 57 when they were back in the pits. So, like, yeah, it was all a mess because the lap did count in the Grand Prix, but didn't count for the positions because they never all got through sector 1, even though they kind of all did.
Yeah,
It was
bizarre.
just a mess. Yeah, but that does segue very nicely into this week's quiz because you stitched me up last week with a really difficult category of name Australians, which I failed on miserably. But this was the first race to have 3 red flags in since, you know the answer, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Since Mugello 2020.
Yeah.
All you have to do is name me the point scorers from that race in Mugello 2020.
Jamie.
And if you get one wrong, it's done. So
what?
You've got 10 to get.
Right. Okay. Let me just think about this sensibly then.
There's no time limit, so take your time.
No, that's fine. So I've just got to get the top 10 from Mugello 2020.
Yes.
So Hamilton won, because that was the race he wore his Breonna Taylor top.
Indeed.
Bottas was second.
Mm-hmm.
Albon got a podium.
He did.
That was his first ever podium. After he jumped Daniel Ricciardo late in the day.
He did. This is very logical. This is not like you usually.
No, I know. Normally I just... Oh, it's because you've given me no time limit.
Yeah.
Sergio Perez surely scored points.
He did.
But I now know drivers that didn't score points either. So Verstappen obviously didn't finish that race. Stroll obviously didn't finish that race. Gasly obviously didn't finish that race because he had the collision with Max, and I think Charles got involved in that as well. I mean, I've got 5 already. I'm pretty happy with that.
You have, yeah.
Finished that race. George Russell definitely didn't. I should just go with some safe ones, but it just finished that race. It was only 10 cars that finished.
No, 11 cars finished that race.
11 cars finished that race.
Yeah.
So George Russell definitely didn't then. Or if he did, he didn't score points. I'm trying to think. Ocon?
Incorrect.
Oh!
Ocon is wrong. Ocon actually pulled out of the race during one of the red flags with a brake issue. So, unfortunate. You missed 6th place. You got the top 5, so that was all right.
Yeah.
6th was Norris in the McLaren.
Oh, I should have got Norris,
Should have got Norris. 7th was Kvyat, which would have been quite hard. Leclerc finished 8th.
Oh, he did finish
Ferrari.
8th?
He did.
Was it Seb that was out early on?
No, Raikkonen was 9th for Alfa Romeo, and Vettel was 10th. So both Ferrari scored points, which is
I honestly thought one of the Ferraris binned it, yeah. If I was going to... Well, I mean, to be honest,
Russell did finish.
It was 11th, was it? Yeah. I couldn't remember whether Russell was the only one that didn't score points or was going to score points and then didn't finish. I thought... Yeah, I can't remember, to be honest. I'll take 5 out of 10 there. Not too bad going at the end of the race. But of course, yeah, after Sainz's penalty in Australia, obviously it meant that Verstappen won ahead of Hamilton, Alonso. Stroll somehow, both Aston Martin, they're getting big points, despite the fact one of them locked up and binned it at turn 3, and the other one got binned off at turn 1. Perez recovered rather not gracefully for P5, of course, after he locked up and almost binned it at turn 1. Norris gets his first points of the year ahead of Hülkenberg. Piastri as well makes it a double McLaren's points haul, and then Zhou Guanyu and Yuki Tsunoda rounded out our top 10 there, despite, obviously, like we said, Tsunoda's heroics as well, from what would have been 13th to 5th, or 13th to 4th even, on that penultimate lap, because he also did a very good job at avoiding the carnage. But, Jamie, who was your driver of the day from this Grand Prix?
Very predictably, I'm going to give it to Nico Hülkenberg. I think Gasly would have deserved it had he not taken out his teammate on the restart for just hanging with the top guys basically really well all race.
Yep.
So, yeah, but unfortunately for Gasly, he crashed. Hülkenberg didn't crash and finished P7 for his first points since Nürburgring 2020. Yeah, 2020.
Yep.
So
Eiffel GP.
yeah.
But it must also be said, Hulkenberg didn't do the rest of the parade lap. Not parade lap. What is
No,
the
he
name of
didn't.
the lap
The
after
in-lap.
a Grand Prix? Yeah.
He had a Jensen Button style Melbourne engine failure coming up to the line, but thankfully he crossed the line and actually got the points in the bag. That would have been so difficult if 10 minutes to go he was like so close to the podium and ends up DNFing.
Yeah. It would just be Hulkenberg things. I've
Yeah.
noticed as well, Jamie, you never put on the notes about how George Russell had an engine failure.
Oh, I forgot about that. Well, he did. So I was doing the notes from memory because I have no internet.
Shock him.
Shocking stuff.
Race rating then, Jamie. What
Who's
are we
your driver
saying?
of the day? He never said.
Oh, sorry, I never got my driver of the day. You normally don't let me have one, to be fair. I am going to give it to Lando Norris. Did a very, very good
Fair.
job in the
Nice.
McLaren this weekend, I think. Scored, like we said, first points of the year for him. So he did pretty well in that regard. So Lando Norris, yeah, my driver of the day this weekend. Predictions recap then, Jamie. Now, you're going to start baiting people in my comments section, aren't you, after this one?
I may have been replying with a few eye emojis earlier on today, but yeah, I kind of went out on a limb with a bit of a random top 3 last week, and I was very nearly bang on. So there we go.
Yes. Yeah.
I went what? Verstappen pole, Verstappen win.
4
with
points.
Actually, Russell
Yep.
and Alonso, P2 and 3, which people slated me for, of course. This is the social media we're talking about. And I got, 2 out of 3 in the right place, and the other one, Russell was...
There's a very
obviously
good
ahead of
chance
Hamilton.
could have finished there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm happy. I got +6 this weekend.
Yep.
And Matt tried to be boring and failed.
Yeah, of course, when I predict a boring result, you then get some spice. So I Verstappen pole, Verstappen win correct. And then I had Checo in P2, which of course was pretty much over by Q1. And Charles Leclerc that was over by turn 3. So that, really did screw me this weekend there, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, means the points are now up to... I think you're on 13, and I'm on 8.
All right, that's a
Because this is
normality
so
resumed, but we're
badly
getting a bit
rigged.
close.
So badly rigged. Every single year. But, Jamie, race rating then.
Race
As our
rating,
last-
I low-key enjoyed it. I feel like there's always something about early morning races that, I don't know, I just quite like it. Like, I feel like most Japanese Grand Prix are quite boring, but I just like getting up early to watch F1 for some reason. So, yeah, I'll go for a 7. It's probably my favourite race of the season so far.
Yeah, I think, for me, unfortunately, it became a little bit too farcical at the end there. I think, apart from that, we did have some good battles and everything else, but I think this weekend, it's very, very rare, actually, I score a race lower than you, but I'm only going to give it a 6. Just sometimes races have to finish under a safety car, and F1 desperately need to learn that.
Yeah.
But
Well, Monza last year didn't it? But
Monza did last year, yeah. So they're now 1 for 3 over the last couple of years. But anyway, is there anything else we need to add? I think we've gone through pretty much everything we needed to.
we're not doing F1 Fantasy real quick. I mean, we've both got exactly the same team, aren't we? So,
I mean, I haven't loaded it up and you can't access it. So,
Yeah,
I mean, F1
true.
Fantasy is so dead we can't really do a lot with it anymore.
No,
I'll
unfortunately.
quickly have a look. I'll quickly find.
I just
where-
think we've both done quite well, so I want to see if we're in the top 10.
we definitely won't be in the top 10 this week because people.
Well, you know,
will have mega
out of
driven.
the four top scoring drivers, out of the 5 top scoring drivers, we both had 4 of them. So, yeah. The problem
let's have a
it's so
look
template.
then.
It's so easy to get. Well, the template is you get both Red Bulls plus Red Bull as a team. You get both Aston Martins plus Aston Martin as a team. And then
Jamie,
you get
there's like
them
1,000 people that tied in each position. Genuinely, there was 32 people that tied in P21 this week.
Nice.
8th championship was the winner, though. He had Verstappen, obviously turboed, Perez megaed, Alonso, Stroll, and Zhou Guan Yu. But I'm guessing we both... So apparently I ranked 140th this week, which I'm guessing you did as well.
Yeah. It's just a shame that the pricing's all wrong, really, because it's got potential to be a good game, but yeah, you can just get the best team. Like, you get 3 Red Bulls, 3 Aston Martins, and you choose between Zhou or Hulkenberg or Albon or whoever. So yeah, it's a very very dead game, unfortunately. But we'll carry on as much as we
You
can.
actually, finished P53.
Oh great!
Yeah,
Well, I don't
because
know
you had
how.
Hulkenberg in.
Oh great! What a baller! We love
So
that.
you did quite well there. Overall, though, in the league, Jamie, I'm still inside the top 100. I'm in 99th
Nice.
still. I have dropped back this week, but I'm not going to moan about that all too much. Let me just try and see if I can find you. You are
I think I'm a little bit
154th.
behind you. Oh nice.
So I'm
Well,
still
there we
beating
go.
you in that regard.
If we're still playing this in Abu Dhabi, we might both be in the top 10 by the way it's going. So.
Yeah, by the way, everyone's getting bored of it this year. I mean, F1 Fantasy, it's meant to be so much fun, and they have just killed it this year. But thank you all so much for listening nonetheless. If you have enjoyed, please do make sure you leave a like, get yourself subscribed, follow us on all our various social medias. That will be linked down in the description below, of course, if you're listening here on YouTube. And yeah, now we've got 4 weeks of just talking about random stuff to try and make our way to Baku there. We don't enjoy a summer break 3 races into a season.